Hey, Algebra ABers. I just want to recap really quickly what you guys did yesterday, which was simplifying square roots. And I think one of the most important things to understand when you're simplifying square roots is what is a perfect square. So I bet you actually know what most of these are. I'm going to list off a couple. We'll talk about them. So let's see. 1 is a perfect square. 4 is a perfect square. 9, 16. I bet you could name the next one. 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, and we'll stop right here at 100. And why these are important is because these are a lot of the nice numbers that we can take square roots of. For example, what's the square root of 25? 5. What's the square root of 64? 8. What's the square root of 100? 10, right? It's good to know when we're simplifying square roots, which are the nice ones that we can take the square root of. So we'll do a couple examples and I'll leave this up on the side. And when I do any example, I'll always draw out this list. It's really helpful to have it in front of you. So let's see here. Number 1, simplify the square root of 18. Now, 18 is not on this list. We cannot take the square root of 18 totally, but we can break it up into two parts where one of them is a perfect square. Now, let's look at our list here. Are there any perfect squares that divide into 18? Here's how I like to do it. I would start right here at 16. Obviously, 25 will not divide into 18. But 16 has a chance. It doesn't. So let's go to the next one. Will 9 divide into 18? Actually, 9 does. So we're good there. So we can break up the square root of 18 into the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. And you know what's beautiful about the square root of 9? It's a perfect square. So we can take the square root of that. We get 3 times the square root of 2. The square root of 2 is not a nice number, so we would just leave it like that. And so, in essence, we've taken some of the square root. We didn't take all of it, because 18 isn't a perfect square. But we could break it up where we could take some of the square root. And so that's really all you're doing. The goal here is to try to break these up and find a perfect square in there. So let's do another example. Let's look at the square root of 50. This is a classic. Love this one. Square root of 50. Is the square root of 50 a perfect square? No, it doesn't fall on here. So I would start right here. Obviously, 64 won't go into 50. 49 has a chance because it's smaller. But that's not going to work. Will 36 go into 50? No. What about 25? Ding, ding, ding. 25 does go into 50. So we can break this up into the square root of 25 times by the square root of 2. That's because, what's 25 times 2? 50. So, you know what's beautiful about the square root of 25? It's a perfect square, and we can take the square root of it. And you know why that happened? Because we made it that way. What is the square root of 25? It is 5. Square root of 2, again, not a nice number, so we'll just leave it as a square root of 2. And so we have taken also some of the square root. Now, one last thing I want to talk about. This is kind of a pro tip. Let's zoom in here on number 2. Notice how I always wrote the perfect square first. I could have very easily written this as the square root of 50 and broken it up into the square root of 2 times by the square root of 25. And that is correct. Still good. And then the square root of 2 would stay here. And this would be 5. And that is technically a correct answer. There's nothing wrong with that, except it looks really weird having the perfect square second. When you write answers like this, you lend yourself to a lot of mistakes, especially if you're kind of sloppy. Maybe you extend your square root line out, and then it's the square root of 2 times 5, which is wrong. So I would recommend always, absolutely always, write the square root or the perfect square first. Write the perfect square first. That is incredibly important. It'll make everything so much easier. And you can even see in both of our examples, we always put the perfect square first. Okay, that's just my little recap. Of course, those who are practicing just taking some of the square root, it's a little bit easier identifying all of the square root. That would be taking the square root of any of these numbers, or none of the square root, which would be if no perfect squares divide in. And we'll practice some of those a little bit later. Thanks, guys.